Good evening. Hope the people online can hear me. Perfect. Um, yeah, we'll just start with a meditation, coming back to the theme of loving kindness, because we could read the entire text that we've been studying so far, the 7-point attitude training, as a very large text on loving kindness, or a very large text on compassion, or a very large text on bodhicitta, which is the highest level of loving kindness and compassion combined. Can also be read as a text on mindfulness, which we're going to talk about tonight a little bit. And it can also be read as a text on wisdom with all of its multiple forms, because when we truly understand interdependence, the emotional glow of that, the emotional expression of that is loving kindness and compassion. And so, from that point of view, everything that's related to the more method oriented side of things, things that are related to bliss, to compassion, to loving kindness, to joy, they're all just natural expressions of our wisdom that sees how we all are interconnected, how we all are interexistent, interrelated, interbraided, and so forth. So we'll meditate a little bit on both that, the wisdom side of things, and on loving kindness for ourselves and for others. And if you want to join the meditation, please find a comfortable stationary position that would support your body in the best possible way. For many of us, that means adopting an upright position, which would entail our spine being gently elongated and our shoulders being relaxed. Although some people would prefer to meditate in the spine position, lying flat on their back, or even meditating on one's right side. And we begin the practice itself by bringing our awareness into the space of the body, all the way down to the ground where our body is being held by earth, by the earth element. Noticing the stillness and the stability there, the sensations of firmness. And releasing tension deeply, first from our feet and toes, if that's available to us, or from the lower part of our body in general. Then from the upper part of our legs, from our pelvic floor, the muscles around our thighs, our buttocks, our lower back, and our lower abdomen. Eventually arriving at the space of our torso, where once again we can find the sensations and where we can release the physical tension. Allowing our breath to flow freely. And then equally relaxing our shoulders and our upper arms. Moving down towards our forearms, our hands, our fingers. From there, coming back to our shoulders, exploring the sensations in our neck, in the back of our head, in our crown, and eventually in our facial muscles. And then bringing our awareness to the entirety of the body and allowing the pranas or the energies of our breathing to flow freely in an uncontrived manner where we're not trying to hold the breath, force the breath, alter the rhythm of the breath in any way. And with our body resting in this manner as the support for the ensuing practice and our entire class, spending some moments in revisiting our highest aspirations for this exploration, our own personal highest goals related to spiritual or psychological growth, contemplative practice, inner maturation of any kind. And if possible, checking whether we can transform our initial motivation, which of course is still meaningful, into the boundless attitude of bodhicitta, where we wish ultimately to fully wake up for the benefit of all sentient beings. And telling ourselves that, if possible, I am practicing right now in order to gain full awakening, attain full awakening for the benefit of all who live. To bring them happiness and to bring them freedom from suffering. And on the basis of that, in thinking of all these sentient beings or fellow sentient beings, those who, like us, are still somewhat confused or very confused, we focus on the fact that everything that we possess, everything that we know, everything that we own came to us through the interdependent actions of numerous sentient beings. Our clothes, made by numerous beings who were working on them consciously, but also these clothes are a result of numerous sentient beings losing their lives inadvertently. Numerous insects, some animals perhaps, and then everyone who had to suffer in hard labor for us to be able to wear these. Same with the tons of foods that are nourishing our body throughout one lifetime. And all the liquid we consume as well. And all the medical care. And the shelter that we're using. And the financial streams of money and other resources. And our knowledge of mundane subjects such as technology, languages, the way to do our taxes, proper diet, and so forth. And of course, our spiritual qualities as well, cultivated because we were relying on the inspiration from other beings, and we were focusing on fellow sentient beings as an object of patience, generosity, compassion, and so forth. Through all of this, we are deeply interconnected to everyone else in existence. And we're also connected through our deepest nature, which is neither one, meaning it cannot be divided into separate chunks of pristine awareness, but is also not many. It is not one big soup. It is not many different chunks. It transcends those categories altogether. And yet, symbolically, it's sometimes compared to a shared root system of luminous, cognizant, empty, compassionate awareness. To whatever degree I might be feeling that interconnectedness right now, I should be able to freely send out the wish of loving kindness. May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be peaceful. May all beings be at ease or live with ease. Abide in a state of ease. Happy and healthy and peaceful and at ease. May all beings arrive at this state, including myself and all the others. Including those of us who are present here right now, including everyone we're connected to through our multiple communities. Sending out this powerful wish for all beings, including ourselves, to abide in a state of sukha, well-being, including the ultimate sukha of full awakening. And then from this approximation of immeasurable loving kindness, which would be extended to all beings equally, progressing towards the stage that's sometimes known as the great loving kindness. Great in that it not simply wishes for all beings to be happy, but also takes the responsibility for that. Not from the point of view of our limited human self, but from the point of view of our Buddha nature, our pristine awareness. And that intention is along the lines of, may all beings be happy. I myself, of course meaning this boundless nature, will bring them to the state of happiness. And that is often combined with an inner supplication or prayer. May all the enlightened beings and my teachers inspire my mind so that I'm able to do this. Leaving this wish in our mind, but to conclude the practice itself, redirecting our awareness towards the experiences of the body, noticing its sensations in its current state and grounding ourselves there. And slowly introducing some movement as we conclude this preliminary practice. So our classes have become a bit of a private club, very elite. But to do a little bit of masonry, we can think, oh, there's only 3 of us here in person tonight. We're like the 3 jewels, very auspicious. If it was just the 2 of us, would say, oh, we're like the 2 bodhicittas, very auspicious. If it was just me alone, I'd probably cry a little bit, but then I'd say, oh, it's like I'm the sole true nature of reality, very auspicious. So no matter how many people show up, Buddhism always has some list to refer to. And then that's a common mind training technique in itself, also a type of attitude bending, lojong. Whenever something happens, either see it as if it's bad, see it as a purification of negative karma, which it is from that point of view, or see it as an expression of positive interdependence, which then how wonderful. But also even things that are seemingly trouble can be seen as an expression of positive interdependence. So I remember one of my teachers telling me, yeah, if you ever drop a cup and break it, just think how auspicious. Because everything can be auspicious from a certain point of view. It's our mind that thinks, oh no, this was the most divine, delicious cup in the world. How am I going to live without it? No, you broke the cup, and now there's space for something new. Or maybe the breaking of that cup remove a major obstacle to your well-being. Or maybe it's a reminder, like in the case of great master Xu Yun, who was one of the great patriarchs of Chinese Buddhism. He was born in 19th century and lived until the 20th century. And according to some sources, including his own diaries, which he kept very meticulously, he lived to a very, very senior age, way over 100, way over 130, I think, maybe even more. Very, very exceptional individual and great master of what we colloquially known as Zen, but in his case, that was actually Chan Buddhism, which is the Chinese branch of that tradition and the root branch, actually, because Zen was then arose from the Chinese tradition, along with Tien in Vietnam, Sun in Korea. They're all interconnected. They all developed separately from a certain point, but they have the shared root system. So Xu Yun was the holder of the original, the earlier lineage of Chan, and at one point, after he's done lots of practice, including prostrating all across China in a very large prostrating pilgrimage. He was going to holy sites and to accumulate merit, which is a practice we discussed last time, which can be done in many different ways. One thing that he did was he physically prostrated after taking, it's known as 3 steps, 1 bow. So you take 3 steps, and at the end of the 3rd step, you do a full physical prostration. So you lie flat on the ground and this sort of physical bowing yoga. Then you get up, you make 3 more steps, you do 1 more bow. And in this way, you slowly travel all across China or all across Tibet or all across India. I know people who have done the similar thing in on the west coast of the United States. So it can be really anything. You know, you could do the same thing on Camino del Santiago in Europe if you want it. It's more about knowing that there is some sacred object that you, or some sacred space that you're moving towards in this pilgrimage mindset. And of course, doing the inner practice of not just simply doing the physical yoga, but maintaining that inner attitude of appreciation, faith, respect, and so forth, reciting the necessary verbal formulas and all of that. So he was doing that for decades already, and he had very profound realizations in terms of concentration practice, because in some In some cases, he would go into such deep concentration or samadhi, a state of mental gatheredness, that he would abide in perfect trance-like concentration for days or weeks. And then he would emerge from that concentration and discover that the rice gruel that he made for himself was completely covered in mold. He was in meditation for so long, mold grew on his thingy thing. And he did lots of that, obviously accumulating all the conditions to succeed in his practice of ultimate bodhicitta, wisdom, which is the highest goal, the most difficult thing to accomplish. So he did that, and eventually was able to experience a direct breakthrough into the true nature of reality. But that happened when he was in a group retreat situation, and someone accidentally, when handing out tea or pouring tea into everyone's cup, someone accidentally scalded his hand with hot tea. He dropped the cup broke, and in that moment he experienced the true nature of reality. And then he composed a little poem about that, and since then was considered to be one of the greatest masters. It doesn't always happen as a breakthrough with something dramatic. That is not the case with many traditions. And that major breakthrough in itself is a result of multiple other breakthroughs and all the other work that we did on removing the knots of grasping. But nonetheless, even breaking a cup can be a major enlightening experience for some people. So, mind bending. But the beautiful part of it that I wanted to illustrate by telling that seemingly meandering, meaningless story was that we do experience major moments of breakthrough with regards to all of these practices after we have accumulated the preconditions. And accumulating the preconditions might seem like boring, grueling work of, yes, sitting on the cushion, doing these mental movements of meditating on this or visualizing that or reciting this. And it's also done through all of these practices in which just in daily life we open the door and we think, may I open the door to enlightenment for all beings. Or we sit down on the tube or on the underground and we just think, oh yeah, there's some people around, may they all be happy and have the causes of happiness. So every tiny drop of virtue that we drop into that bucket of merit and wisdom, of wisdom and method, is seen as quintessentially leading to the major event of our awakening one day. So not to underestimate the importance of these tiny things, these tiny movements, and that's exactly what the next point is bringing us to. So we have covered in the root text, and we don't need it right now necessarily. I'm just going to read out the meaning. I'm just going to read it out and then explain the meaning. And of course, it's there on the resource page for this course. We have shared and the reception has as well. I can email to you if you missed that. We have covered 3 of the 7 points, and we have today and next Friday. So that means that we'll have to cover the remaining points very, very fast. But fortunately, points 5, 6, and 7, although they seem like a lot, because there's lots of text there, they're very simple in that they're very, very simple practical suggestions for what to do and what not to do in order to train our mind. Whereas the earlier points, especially point 2, they're not so elaborate in terms of wording, but they're very profound, especially when it comes to ultimate bodhicitta, because simply saying, between sessions, act like an illusory person, or simply saying the opponent itself liberates itself in its own place. What does that even mean? Like not clear at all. Whereas all the points in 6 and 7 are more or less simple. There's one of them that just says, train resolutely. Okay. Don't wish for any things, meaning don't grasp unto gratitude from others. Okay, that's very practical. That's fairly self-evident. And that it's for that reason that we don't need to spend that much time on those. But we will go through them very briefly. And there are wonderful reminders that can be visited again and again. People write them out on cards, and you take out a card, you think of that principle, you try to apply it. But those are easier to apply in a way because they're very practice-oriented. They're very much about daily life. The one that we've reached in the text is both about daily life and meditation that can be done in a retreat situation or in a group practice session or in many other ways. So it's point 4, condensation of the practice in one lifetime. So here, Atisha and Geshe Chekawa, and just a reminder, Geshe Chekawa was the author who wrote this text down, But Atisha, a great Indian master, great scholar, and great yogi, was the source of these teachings. He introduced them as a set of oral instructions. He transmitted them to his student Dramtonpa. Dramtonpa secretly passed them on, and for a little while they were passed on secretly. And then Geshe Chekawa came along and thought it would be good to put them to writing before this oral AUR, oral meaning coming through your lineage, gets broken, or someone twists something, and then we will end up with a very, very complex teaching that is not at all true to the original form. So he wrote that down. For that reason, he is credited as the author as well. So Atisha and Geshe Chekawa here, let's imagine them as a team, are trying to give us a very, very practical set of instructions for living and dying. Everything that came before are different types of mental training that are good to accomplish over time. Even in the first point, where we are invited to do 4 practices, meditate on our precious human rebirth and how precious it is to have these opportunities right now, meditate on the fact that we're mortal and will die sooner or later, one day, even if it's in 100 years or 100,000 years, we'll die, so better be prepared for that. Then the fact that we have karma, meaning compulsions left in our mental continuum by actions and intentions that we generate. And then the fact that an existence that is fully focused on hedonic well-being, and that is largely our samsaric existence, will always, in major ways, be disappointing. We'll get some moments of pleasure, and then they give space to, they are replaced by moments of pain. That's not nice. No one likes that. Better aspire for, yes, a dignified level of hedonia, but also for profound states of eudaimonic well-being, which can completely transcend samsara. And the ultimate levels of eudaimonia are the 2 types of nirvana, fully liberating our mind from suffering, or on top of that, that's the higher one, liberating our mind from suffering, but also becoming omniscient, all-knowing, so that we can guide all beings towards full awakening. That's the type of nirvana that the Buddha has. Whereas personal nirvana is sometimes something that's accomplished by those who only aspire to liberate themselves. In this system of presentation, there's these 2 types of nirvana, abiding and non-abiding. We want the full one, hopefully, because we like nice stuff. So like if I'm buying a phone, why not buy Nirvana Pro Max, instead of just the regular Nirvana? So kind of very skillful marketing here on behalf of the Buddha. So what do we need for that Nirvana Pro Max? We need these bodhicitta teachings, and the point number 2 explains how to get that bodhicitta once we have established the foundation of the 4 thoughts. So we are invited to meditate on ultimate bodhicitta and conventional bodhicitta. Conventional bodhicitta has to do with compassion, love, and all of that. We just try to bring our altruism to its fullest form, which is this wish, the overpowering, overwhelming, constantly present wish to become a Buddha for the benefit of all beings. And that also includes, yes, helping everyone in the moment. If we don't do that, we're also not progressing towards awakening. So therefore, we're practicing things like generosity, nonviolence, being patient with others, enthusiastically applying ourselves to benefiting others in any way that's possible, and then cultivating also concentration and wisdom. And then ultimate bodhicitta is the bodhicitta that's about knowing the true nature of reality. So what did Xu Yun experience when he dropped that cup and he broke through to a deeper perception of reality? It was what ultimate bodhicitta sees. He used a specific approach towards cultivating that ultimate bodhicitta. That specific approach for him was a practice that is very important in this lineage of Chan transmission, and is also used in the Korean tradition, and that was the practice of Hwato, or Hwadu, as it's referred to in the Korean tradition, in which one is given a very specific question to contemplate. And Xu Yun's personal question was, who is dragging this corpse around? So he spent decades meditating on this question, who is dragging this corpse around? And there's a very specific way to meditate on that. It's not just asking ourselves that in writing and journaling, that's helpful, but that's not what he used. He used a very specific way of meditating on that question to such an extent that the immediacy, the urgency of it allowed him to break through and see the true nature of all phenomena and his mind and his self. Because the self is what's supposedly dragging the corpse around, the body around, that which animates the body is supposedly the self. But is it so or not. That's what he was trying to understand and did. But for us, here Atisha gives a very different set of instructions. Instead of making us meditate on whoever it is that's dragging the corpse, he invites us to think about all phenomena that we perceive as like a dream, and then ask ourselves, what is this mind that is seeing this dream? And then it goes on from that. We covered that more or less elaborately. And it's a sequence of 4 meditation instructions there, which can take years or decades to unpack over time, but can also bring some levels of insight even in our very first session of practicing with them. A lot depends on the overall context of our practice and what else is it that we're doing to support this type of wisdom cultivation. Then point 3 was teaching us, that's the one that we concluded last time. Point 3 was teaching us how to use these ideas of bodhicitta and everything else to transform problematic situations in our life into happiness and joy. And last time I gave a very simple example from my own life. I was dissatisfied with how I was assessed at an exam one point. And fortunately, I had an ebook on my pocket device. And so when I was going home, I was like, okay, I have this book about transforming problems into the path. Not quite sure what is even that path. I wasn't quite sure at that moment. And but still sounds inviting, because I am feeling like I've just gone through a problematic situation. So I might as well read that. And I did. It was completely life-changing for me in that I'm still reading such texts and practicing with them every day, trying to do my best to transform my mind into something less, you know. And one way to do that is to see the difficult situations that we face as invitations towards greater compassion. I'm suffering. Everyone is suffering. May we all be free from suffering. Or as invitations to better understand karma. If I'm suffering now, that means some causes were created there, some compulsions ripened as this experience. Because how did I end up in this situation? You know, what brought me here? And in a similar way, of course, joyful situations can be an invitation of that nature as well. So if for some ungodly reason you're enjoying this class, think what might have brought you here. What karmic compulsions must have ripened for you to end up in such a situation? Well, Buddhists would say that it had to be a root of incredible virtue. Because in the past, maybe in multiple past lives, you met something Dharma related. You slowly accumulated seeds connected to the Dharma, related to the Dharma, and over time they ripened as you being here, looking at this text. Yes, you're not in the presence of an actual teacher or anything like that. I'm simply offering translator notes on this. But the text itself is absolutely valid. It was translated by an excellent translator. There are many incredible commentaries on it that we have on our resource list. So from that point of view, you've encountered genuine Dharma. And moreover, you did not simply encounter a little piece of the Dharma that is not connected to anything else. And yes, you studied, but then you're like, okay, but what is the overall picture? What's the overall plot? I'm very confused. This text contains everything that's needed to become fully enlightened. It needs to be all of it needs to be unpacked. You need good commentaries. You need to read them 100 times, and see what all of these lines mean. But here you have an assembly of every piece that's needed to become a fully awakened omniscient Buddha, or at least to gain the same level of realization as these great masters that we have mentioned. Shuyun and Longchenpa and Jigme Lingpa and Atisha himself and all these other great people from across, great yoginis and yogis from across the last 2,500 years. They practiced with similar teachings or with this very teaching. So might as well use this one. It's very clear, relatively concise, can be folded like this, put into your front pocket, and boom, you have the entirety of the Dharma right here. Then you sit down and you unfold it. I'm being very, very clear about how to fold and unfold. You unfold it and you're like, oh, okay, la 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 la, la di da di da. You read it and it reminds you about all the quintessential points that you need to become fully awakened, which is an incredible feat of technology. We have, of course, right now, many of the great Buddhist Dharma texts available on our phones. Yes, that's wonderful. And in the past, that was, of course, not at all the case. Just the collection of the Buddhas on teachings preserved in Tibetan language was at least 108 volumes, huge volumes, long pages, not bound. So you had to carry 108 volumes on your back if you wanted to have the Buddhist teachings with you at all times. Now you can have many of them on your phone, but your phone might get discharged and then you're like, oh no, where did all my dharma go? So that would be quite sad. And yet you still have this little page that's right there in your pocket. And many people learn such texts by heart, and they just recite them. They recite these texts to themselves every day as an instruction or as a reminder. And this is, of course, not the most concise text. There are texts that can be explored kind of over time, and some of them cover all the same points, but they're just 4 lines. Cover all of the same points, but there's just 3 lines. That's easy to memorize, right? Cover all the same points, but there are 8 verses. We did that one before starting this course. So, lots of flexibility there. That's the beauty of so-called Lojong teachings that we're studying. Everything is contained in this brief, essential nature, in this brief, essential form. But because that's still not quintessential enough for us, we're like, oh no, it's too long. It's sometimes 58 lines. That's too much. Atisha is saying, well, how about I give you a list of 5 things, 5 points. Just try to memorize those. Use them every day, and you'll be fine. These 5 points will teach you what to do while you're alive, meaning right now, and they will also give you a very clear instruction for when you're passing away. Because when you suddenly realize that you're passing away, because a truck is rushing towards you, or you're in the hospital and the doctor just said, oh, your heart is giving, you have like 2 hours. Do you want us to call anyone? Or whatever, we should imagine those dramatic situations in this case to understand what would our mind do. It was very easy very tragically so, for my friends in Nepal when the great earthquake of 2015 happened, because it took so many lives, and even for people who it did not kill, and every one of my friends personally survived. But when it happened, the magnitude of it was so immense that, of course, people were thinking, oh, I might have like 3 seconds to live. Where does my mind turn right now? And their mind turned, for many of them, they told me, their mind turned towards their practice. Many of them instinctively thought of Tara, which is a wonderful thought to have, of the female Buddha Tara, a wonderful thought to have. If you are destined to, by karma, to pass away in that moment, well, to die with a virtuous thought is a very important task because it ensures good rebirth and so forth. Or some of them did other types of practice, recited Om Mani Padme Hum, or took refuge, or tried to practice compassion. Basically, they were able, quite a few of them, to put their mind in a virtuous state. And the same is true of my incredible Dharma friends, Dharma siblings in Ukraine right now, to whom I deeply bow. In that when the war began in 2022, and they started living with daily rocket fire and the daily imminent danger of passing away, quite a few of them developed a very strong practice of knowing any moment might be my last moment. So where do I keep my awareness right now? And of course, some of them initially asked, what's the best advice in that? And like, I need the best pith instruction for that from the Dharma, because I don't want, like, it is not a conceptual exercise. It's not what would, it is an actual thing. I might die any moment. Tell me, what do the texts or what do the teachers say about the best thing to keep your mind on when you know you're about to die? And of course, I try to very, very accurately quote what my teachers say about such things and what the texts say. And what we have here is one of those very important instructions. So first, Atisha and Geshe Chekowa cover what to do during the day. So during our lifetime, in brief, the essence of the quintessence teachings is applying the 5 forces. And then Dr. Berzin unpacks that for us as a translator. He adds this thingy in square brackets. That's the annotation. And the annotation just lists those 5 powers or 5 forces. So what are they? Intention, white seed, habituation, eliminating all at once, and prayer. So according to Atisha and Geshe Chekowa, if throughout our life we use those 5 principles, And it's very good to memorize them, to have stickers with them all around us. I don't know if we're getting tattoos. That's the meaningful thing to tattoo on our on the back side of our hand. Anything that would remind us. Our phone having an alarm that at a certain point during the day displays these 5 words for us. Any sort of reminder that we might use, including just having a sticker, would be quite wisely used on these 5 things. So what are they if we unpack them? Intention is here not simply any intention, even though Buddhism in general does attach great importance to making sure all of our attentions are meaningful. Buddhism has a great deal to say about the cultivation of the so-called conative intelligence. So conative, C-O-N-A-T-I-V-E, conative, is the intelligence that's related to our desires, wishes, and aspirations. It's a psychological term. Conation is our ability to desire, to wish, to aspire. Conative is that which refers to conation or desiring. So we know about emotional intelligence and all these other things, even somatic intelligence, social intelligence. There are many, many different kinds of being, different ways of being intelligent. And one of them is our intelligence with regards to our wishes and desires. So how many desires to have, what desires to have, what desires to feed, and which to discard, how to make sure our desires are beneficial for ourselves and for others. So basically how to work with our energy of desiring stuff. That's a very big question. That's the least researched aspect of our psyche, or least researched aspect of our mind in terms of modern science. But for Buddhism, one of the best researched. Tibetan Buddhism in particular, more than any other tradition, pays great attention to this field. And quite justly, Tibetan tradition, and that's generalization, but I think it's very fair, says that the ultimate level of cognitive intelligence or cognitive balance is to have bodhicitta, because that's the best desire to have. It covers everything and it brings all sorts of goodness. So if you have the wish to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings, it will bring you hedonic happiness, it will bring you eudaimonic happiness, it will bring benefit to others, including both hedonic and eudaimonic. It will bring you wisdom. It covers everything. Whereas any other desire apart from bodhicitta, the desire to, I don't know, to become rich, or the desire to meet the right partner, or the desire to get a good rebirth, and so on. These are limited things which cannot be said to encompass everything. They're meaningful. It's meaningful to want to have a healthy life. It's meaningful to want to have some level of material abundance, or to meet the right person, or to have meaningful connections, or even to get a good rebirth. Of course, those are meaningful, but they're not all-encompassing, whereas bodhicitta is said to encompass every type of benefit for all. So intention here means the intention to deepen bodhicitta and to never be separated from bodhicitta. So how it looks quite literally is that we wake up in the morning, and if we want to practice these 5 powers, we need to tell ourselves, throughout this day, may I grow more connected to bodhicitta. May I never be separated from bodhicitta. May I express bodhicitta. May I deepen bodhicitta. So we shape our awareness into this form of a very, very powerful resolve to deepen our connection to bodhicitta as much as possible. And then in smaller ways, that can mean that when we're, for example, going into a situation of potential danger, or a situation which would potentially there would be some conflict there, setting the intentions to always be kind and compassionate. So that is part of this point as well. So when we are going to a family meeting, I'll really work on being kind and compassionate and patient there. When we are descending into the abyss known as the tube or the subway, we are thinking, I'll try to be kind, compassionate, empathetic, and patient there. So such intentions, they are all under the general umbrella of bodhicitta. We're trying to be kind because that kindness would make our bodhicitta stronger. Kindness is one of the aspects of bodhicitta, or one of the causes of bodhicitta. We'll try to be patient and so forth. All, yes, will add to this overall glory of bodhicitta, because bodhicitta includes all the types of kindness. So training in any of them contributes to that ultimate goal. So this is the intention, to never be separated basically from bodhicitta, from compassion, from love, from patience, from empathy, all these states that are included. Then the power of white seed is what feeds or fuels our intentions. So it's not enough to simply wish, oh, I'll become a Buddha, or in this case, oh, I'll cultivate bodhicitta. To wish is necessary. Ergo, that's that famous saying that Lama Zopa Rinpoche always used to recall, everything exists on the tip of a wish. So the intention is the primary force. It's absolutely necessary. Without intention, actually, from a Buddhist point of view, no intention, no karma. If we killed someone by accident, but we had no intention whatsoever to do anything, we just stepped on an ant, we're not creating karma because there was no intention. It's an accidental action. What we had the intention to do, perhaps, is to move our foot. And yes, we could have looked more carefully. So the action of moving our foot, which was intentional, that will bring a more complex karma if we did step on someone. But there was no intention to kill, and therefore there was, strictly speaking, no action of killing from our side, even though the ant did die. And for an ant, that's of course a very big deal, which we do need to take into consideration. So the intention is primary, but then we could have a million intentions to cultivate bodhicitta, but no karmic fuel to succeed in that. Similarly, Xu Yun, were he not to accomplish all those practices of prostrating and making offerings for decades, could have for 1,000,000 years sat in that meditation hall, and he could have been pouring scalding tea over his hand and dropping those cups, one after the other, but nothing would have happened because his karmic bank would not have been sufficiently filled with merit or positive karma, which is something that we've discussed already. So white seed here is referring to merit, and what it's saying is if we don't have merit, if we are not actively creating merit, and merit is created through virtuous actions, we will not have the karmic fuel that will make bodhicitta real for us, that will make us succeed in cultivating bodhicitta or loving kindness or compassion. So how it literally looks, and I've witnessed that many, many times, is that people come to a meditation session or a class of some sort, and they sit down to meditate with everyone on loving kindness, like we did in the beginning of this class. We adopt a position, we start thinking all those thoughts, and eventually we go into the intention of, may everyone be happy and peaceful and healthy and at ease. And for some people, there is some feeling to doing that. We feel moved by those thoughts. There is something that's responding deep within us. It might not be super powerful, not like a wave of that feeling, but just, we're not indifferent towards these things. We do think, oh, it would be kind of cool if everyone was peaceful. So that means already that there is some merit that's fueling our practice. But some people, this is what's interesting, when they do that, they feel, oh, I'm dry as a rock. I'm completely dry. Nothing is happening. I'm just mentally saying those words, blah, 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 blah. But I'm not feeling any of it. What's wrong with me? So one thing to explore is that, yes, we can fine-tune the practice through exploring preliminary conditions to loving kindness. We can meditate on a special thing called affection or tenderness and make it a bit more real, or caring. First, make that caring real, then go to loving kindness. We could focus on loving kindness for ourselves first. Maybe the obstacle is there. We just don't love ourselves enough to love others. That's also a possibility. We could go through all of those, and often we do. And we could also go through the therapeutic approach of working quite literally with a therapist who would help us look at some of the traumatic imprinting that we might have, or some of the self-esteem issues that we might have, or issues in connecting with others. That could also have a positive contribution for many people. But sometimes we go through all of those and still nothing. Still our mind is super dry. And then we're like, well, what's wrong with me now? I've gone through all of this, and on therapy, it's like, why am I not feeling a thing? And some of the masters would just say, well, you just need to have more merit. You just need to create more merit. Then it would be fueling your practice, and you would be feeling more in the practice. Not to the extreme of becoming sentimental, which is not at all what loving kindness is about, but into the degree of actually feeling, yes, I am genuinely wishing for beings to be happy, or to be free from suffering when we meditate on compassion. And I do genuinely want to become a Buddha when I'm meditating on bodhicitta. And the same with every other practice, fueling our practices of wisdom and all these other contemplations, and even our mantra practice. Sometimes we recite some mantras and we feel a certain change in our energetic body, in our mind, in our nervous system, in our breath, even, or in our pranas. And sometimes, blah, 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 Om Mani Padme Hum, and nothing. We don't feel like anything has shifted. And although we can isolate other problematic factors, one major one that's often the cause for us not being truly moved is merit. But merit also determines even our ability to visit the teachings or to get those books or to open those books. So it is a very complex karmic interplay where you can give someone the best Dharma book in the world that's also the most accessible and lots of fun stories, very easy to read, super clear in terms of being understandable. There are great Dharma books that are super accessible, but they would not in a million years touch that. And what's ironic, sometimes they would even say, oh, I wish there was just something that could help me cultivate that eudaimonic well-being, just like, I wish I could find something spiritual, something that spoke to me, like a good qualified teacher or a really good source to explore these ideas. And you're like, oh, I gave you this book and here's another one. And you give them 45 books from all these different authors and you buy them tickets to the Dalai Lama's teachings and you buy them a ticket on the plane that will take them to this incredible workshop that's going to happen somewhere in Vietnam or wherever it is that the Dharma teachings happening in large situations. And at the last moment, of course, they break their toe or they decide that they want to see Coldplay or whatever, the situations that happen to people are unimaginable sometimes. In that I have seen those things happen, truly. People buy their teachings to see that one incredible yogi, who then, of course, next year passes away. But at that moment, no one knows that. So people have that like window that you think, oh, this is gonna finally be their breakthrough or my breakthrough. We think that. And then quite literally, some people go to see Coldplay instead or whatever, and it is mind-boggling. So then, of course, the people would say that comes from merit, from not having enough merit, which primarily, once again, here is not for us to judge others and say, oh, you want to see Coldplay, clearly didn't have enough merit, that peasant, So not that, but rather looking at myself and thinking, how can I increase my accumulation of merit without which my attempts to practice the Dharma will not be super successful. So we do those merit accumulating practices. We talked about them last time. And basically, merit is generated by anything that is virtuous. So even if we just meditate on loving kindness, that's going to generate lots of merit. Meditating on compassion going to generate lots of merit. There are actually lots of teachings on how much merit is generated through meditation, loving kindness, and it's all in superlative terms, meaning the Buddha says things like, it is impossible to even measure that. That's absolutely beyond anything you can imagine, which means that's a very good practice to do that. But if we are open to devotional methods, we can generate more specific types of merit that are super good for spiritual practice through doing such things as the 7-limb practice and mandala offering and all these reciting mantras, visualizing the Buddhas, doing prostrations, offerings, offering service to our communities, to our spiritual teachers, and so on. There are many, 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 many things that can be done. And because so many of those things are extremely simple, that's why when you, for example, arrive to Kathmandu and you hang out in the Bodhanath district, you see all the shopkeepers walking around the great stupa of Bodhanath, at least a little bit in the morning, a little bit in the evening, because while they are not focused on spiritual practice in this life as their main thing that they want to accomplish, they're not thinking, oh, I want to become a Buddha right now. They know, oh, a little bit of merit will never harm. So I might as well do those 3 circumambulations. That generates lots of merit because the intention is virtuous. The object is super powerful. Yeah, just walk around the thing 3 times and gives you lots of merit. Easy. So similarly, lots of things that could be done here, but to do something with that intention in mind, do merit generating practices is the invitation here. So having an intention, accumulating as much merit as we can using all the practices that we are familiar with and expanding that toolbox over time, and also deepening those practices. The level on which a beginner would be able to perform the so-called 7-branch practice, which we went through last time very clearly, hopefully, I don't know, and the degree to which an experienced practitioner would be able to do that, and the degree to which a yogi like Shu Yun would be able to perform that. 3 very different things, of course, all in the same line, all including the same elements of prostrating, making mental offerings, confessing, and so on, but different levels of intensity and different power, because the mind that is brought to these things is very different. A beginner would be barely able to recall the stages, even when or reading them out. But then an experienced yogi can bring incredible levels of wisdom and compassion there. So we're moving in that direction collectively. The next one is habituation or familiarization. That's also just the name for meditating in general. As we have established, meditation in Tibetan tradition means habituation or familiarization. What does it mean to meditate on loving kindness? Literally in Tibetan language, the expression would be, I habituate my mind to loving kindness. But what is meant is that we're sitting on the cushion and meditating on it. So the word is different, but the meaning is kind of the same. And here, habituation means both the formal meditation on bodhicitta that we might perform on our own or collectively. So we can come together and do a nice an hour and a half session of meditating on loving kindness. Yes, with breaks, of course, but still accumulating an hour and a half of loving kindness together, habituating our mind to that, familiarizing our mind with that. So that's included in this point. But what's also included here is attempting to habituate our mind to loving kindness or compassion or bodhicitta, primarily those three. Loving kindness and compassion as causes of bodhicitta, and then bodhicitta itself, attempting to habituate our mind to that in every situation that's available to us. So quite often we can't sit down and formally meditate, but this is where such things as these 41 formulas of habituating our mind to bodhicitta, which I will link in the resource page, come through. And those are things like when you pour something into a cup, think, may virtue fill the minds of all beings. When you put on some clothes, think, may all beings be clothed in virtue. When you open a door, may open the doors to awakening for all beings. When you close doors, you think, may I close doors to the lower realms for all beings, so that no one falls into a lower realm. Yada, yada, yada. We can write a billion of those ourselves. Would be super meaningful, because what's important is to apply them. These are not spells to learn. What's important is any thought. Even if we just have one thing, whatever we do, we think, and may all beings be happy, and may all beings be happy. You know, you pour something, may all beings be happy. You cut something, may all beings be happy. That is habituation. We habituate our mind to these intentions. And the most important intention, as Garchen Rinpoche says here, is to habituate our mind to the intention of may all beings be benefited. He says that that's the most important prayer. But also the most important kind of intention, the most important resolve, the most important aspiration to connect to, so that it literally becomes present in our every cell, in our every thought, in every corner of our minds. No matter what we do, the first thought there, strategically thinking, is how can we benefit everyone the most? That's kind of the glowing star deep within our mind, our guiding principle. Then the next one, eliminating all at once. Sometimes that's translated as disgust. It's not the literal translation, but what it means is being disgusted with our self-grasping and our self-cherishing. Those two enemies that we have are primarily with our self-cherishing here, which means, once again, self-cherishing here is defined as the thought that our happiness is more important than the happiness of everyone else. So deep within us, there's that secret conviction that we're super ashamed of admitting to ourselves and to others. Self-grasping is a form of ignorance that grasps at an independently or inherently existent self. That one we counteract through wisdom. We look at that self who is dragging this corpse around. That's the question that Shuyan was asking. So what is this self? We'll look at it, like, oops, actually it doesn't exist the way I thought it does. There's only a convention, a label. There's no little Lobsang there with his buttons that's pressing the buttons to drag this corpse around. So self-grasping is in a way a less tricky thing. And of course, yes, gaining wisdom, super hard. But self-cherishing is the one that is so pervasive because it is shameful in our society. It's shameful in many cultures to be selfish. Not in every culture on this planet. There are some cultures that encourage that. You know, you are supposed to advertise yourself all the time and talk about how great and wonderful you are. And when people say that you're great, you're supposed to say, yes, thank you, I know. There's certainly that in some situations, but many cultures, including, thank goodness, the British culture, if you receive a compliment, you're supposed to say, "Oh no, what are you talking about? I'm a complete piece of shit." So at least from that point of view, that's actually helpful for self-cherishing, because society invites us to include others into our thinking, to include the fact that we are not the most important thing in the world. And yet still, of course, because there's self-cherishing and much more profound than cultural conditioning, on a deeper level, there's lots to undo. So what it means here is, whenever we notice ourselves being selfish, not in terms of self-guided love, self-directed loving kindness, or self-directed self-compassion, not that. Those are virtuous mental states. They're super valid and important. Not that, but simply being all like, oh, I'm the most important, or my happiness is more important. Just like in the story about Saint Teresa that I told one of these times, where she dropped a sugar ring and she thought, oh, my poor sister, her sugar ring is dropped. And then she caught herself and she asked herself, wait, why is this hers and not mine? Maybe I dropped my sugar ring and the one I still have is hers. But the instinct was so powerful that when she only had one actual sugar ring left, she dropped the other one. She thought, oh, that's mine. And the one that I dropped, that one was for my sister. Oh, poor thing. So that's very interesting. So were we to be heard in that story, were we to catch ourselves in that situation, the way to apply this principle of eliminating all at once would be to be like, aha, I caught you. And now I'm going to act against you. So as the moment we catch ourselves being self-cherishing, or the moment we catch ourselves being selfish, self-centered simply, we try to expand that, try to expand our mind from its narrow state. So someone needs help and attention, and we just want to play with our phone. So trying to very gently stretch that, not going into martyrdom and neglecting self-care and fully burning out because of that. Not that. That's a very, very delicate dance here. But still, nonetheless, thinking, oh, how can I, at least in some small way, counteract my self-centeredness while providing myself with adequate self-care and rest and all those things? Because, and that's something that's actually now being explored in some even completely secular articles that I've read unrelated to Buddhism. Self-care in itself as a concept can become a very huge cultural trap, where we prioritize our well-being to such a degree that, first of all, it becomes a capitalist commodity, because then self-care is equated with going to nice fancy spas and buying these special shower gels and things like that, which a nice shower gel can really improve your mood, but obviously it's not the ultimate form of self-care, and yet it's promoted as that. You need these bath salts, otherwise no self-care, no goodie. So we are trying to, of course, find that, but also reminding ourselves that, yeah, and for the Buddha, the ultimate form of self-care is boundless altruistic compassion. So how does it work? And working with that very gently to wiggle ourselves out, to wiggle our mental energy out of both extremes. The extreme of self-centered self-care, self-centered self-care, which is not real self-care, but also the extreme of burning out and crashing and burning and being useless to everyone because of that. So how do we slide between those two? That's the interesting question here. And while we're looking at all of that, catching ourselves being self-centered and thinking, how can I just stretch that in a tiny way, in a very small way, very gentle way? Because if I burn out as a result of that overstretching, not good. But if I'm constantly like, oh no, I can't talk to you, sorry, self-care, it's also not good. So every situation is unique contextually, and we work with it this way. Then final power here, or final force, the force of prayer. And that is literally just prayer, but it's not the kind of prayer in which we ask for a new pair of jeans or to win a lottery. It's a prayer to never be separated from bodhicitta. Just that, setting that out as an actual prayer that we recite. There's a very famous prayer attributed to Nagarjuna, Jangchub Semchug Rinpoche, and it goes on in Tibetan. Most practitioners of Tibetan Buddhism recite it in Tibetan, but there's also a very wonderful poetic translation, originally from Glenn Mullen. May the precious body mind, meaning bodhicitta, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. That's a very, very simple thought. May never be separated from two bodhicittas. May they keep growing. May I never be separated from the bodhicittas that I already have cultivated. May they keep growing. And if I have not cultivated one of these bodhicittas, may I cultivate it, may it be born. And the same for everyone else, not just for me. So we're setting out that intention. There are many, many more bodhicitta prayers of that nature, but it doesn't need to be a formula that someone already wrote for us centuries ago. It can just simply be our own deep wish that we recite as a prayer. May I never be separated from two bodhicittas, and may I strengthen them. And saying that sincerely from our heart in front of ourselves and all the Buddhas. And when we are in the presence of holy objects or realized beings and practitioners, and also it is said that that's one of the best bits of advice that I've ever received, that if you are having an audience with a really qualified spiritual teacher, like a great Lama for some reason came to your location, or you went to see a great Lama somewhere, how much time do you have? There's so much stuff that people do when they get an audience with a high teacher, you know. Where do I begin? No, it's quite fun what we do, because of course we try to, when we find someone we think is special, and especially if it's a person we think that's truly compassionate and maybe even clairvoyant to a certain degree, or extremely clairvoyant, and I know certainly teachers who are that, we think, oh, I need to bring to them my greatest problem. But what comes up in our mind in that moment is so trivial often that it's just laughable and yet completely understandable. So people start talking about their family problems, which of course is painful, is a concern, blah, blah, blah. Or they start saying things like, oh, so I went to this medium and she told me, and I think maybe what's best for me is move to New York. I think it's best for me to New York. Sam knows. Like, girl, you know, it's just yes, of course, but lamas, first of all, that's not where they're there. They're not there to help us make those decisions. It's like, where do I go to the bathroom? As one of the great lamas of the 20th century said, next thing they're going to ask from me is where to piss, you know, because like, who cares? Make your own adult decisions. But what is meaningful to ask for is, dear Rinpoche or Lama or whoever it is, they don't need to have a fancy title to be a realized yogi or yogini, but please bless me to realize bodhicitta, or please pray so that I may realize bodhicitta, you know, well, either one, because if you are addressing an extremely humble yogi or yogini, they would say, oh, I have no blessing. What are you talking about? You know, bless me. They would quite literally make those faces and make those sounds. But then you say, please pray, is like, yeah, sure, you have no blessing. Okay, so please pray for me to realize bodhicitta. No Lama would ever say that's a stupid request. And that's actually incredibly impressive to know, to say that instead of, oh, please bless me to move to New York, you know, and to succeed with my cosmetics company, you know, and okay. Because bodhicitta will bring you all sorts of success anyway. Bodhicitta is the fastest way to generate merit, and with that merit, you'll be drowning in success, you know, from all points of view, but in the way that's most meaningful for all sentient beings, not just from the point of view of our ego. So that's a very meaningful thing to say. And the same when we're visiting pilgrimage sites of any kind, when we're visiting, for example, the great Mahabodhi stupa where the Buddha attained awakening in Bodh Gaya. Walking around that stupa, of course, ideally we would be making lots of different aspiration prayers there. That's what it's there for, to make aspiration prayers, not even to meditate. Meditate we can anywhere. And we can meditate there, and very powerful, but I must say that the primary purpose for the existence of such places is that we can superpower our aspiration prayers there. So the main aspiration prayer, though, is to never be separated from two bodhicittas, because that covers everything. So once again, if we're doing anything like that, the most important prayer to have. So how do we do this throughout the day? We wake up, we generate the intention to be connected to bodhicitta, and we revisit this intention throughout the day. At some points, we might want to do some merit-creating practices, recite some Om Mani Padme Hum here, offer a lamp there, walk around some holy object, meditate on loving kindness, perform some acts of service. You know, all these things that generate good energy, positive energy that will be positive karmic energy, you know, feeding people, helping people, donating to charities, inventing cure from cancer, all of this will create merit. And every single bit of merit that we create, we dedicate to never being separated from two bodhicittas. That would be the power of prayer. For habituation, we actually meditate on loving kindness, bodhicitta, and so forth. And we also use any informal practices that we're familiar with. For example, just simply on occasion returning to this thought of, oh, may all beings be happy. That's informal practice of loving kindness. Then eliminating all at once is catching ourselves in those moments of self-grasping and self-cherishing and saying, aha, I caught you. I'm going to do the opposite, whatever it is, skillfully. And of course, we use our common sense there. And for the power of prayer, we use it in two ways. One is dedication prayers. The other one is aspirational prayers in general. So dedication prayers are the ones that we recite after we have created some virtue. So we do any practice, yoga practice, meditation practice, mantra practice. And then at the end of that, to seal that energy and to keep it safe, we say, may this energy contribute to blah, 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 blah. And then we recite those dedications. And the main one is this one about two bodhicittas, ultimate and relative, or ultimate and conventional. But also, even when we have created no virtue, we can recite aspirational prayers. They will program our mind for lifetimes to come, all the way up to our full awakening. And that's why sometimes there are these very important ceremonies called Mönlam festivals, or festivals of aspirational prayers. The main one was instituted by Tsongkhapa, the founder of the Gelug tradition. That was the biggest one in Lhasa. But then all other traditions developed a similar format as well. And so these days you have a Kagyu Monlam in North America, a Kagyu Monlam in Europe, a Kagyu Monlam, or several Kagyu Monlams actually in India. You have Sakya Monlams, and all the different branches have their own prayer festivals like that. What happens there? A bunch of people come together and they spend a few days or multiple days reciting aspirational prayers together all day long. They drink some tea, and they have food for lunch and dinner and so forth. But the rest of the time, they just recite these long aspirational prayers for the happiness of all beings, for well-being of all, and for freedom of all, and for all beings to never be separated from bodhicitta, and for everything to be peaceful. It's like supercharging our collective cognitive field. Not just my own, which is what I do when I recite those prayers, but collective. And of course, the more people participate, the more that spills out into the rest of reality. And it might not feel like much for us, thinking, well, yeah, well, like there's been a bunch of these Monlams even this year, but there are still 32 wars happening on the planet. What's up with that? But then thinking, well, how many wars would we have if there were no people praying for peace on this planet, or generating those strong intentions in their own minds? May I always be peaceful. May I always contribute to peace. May I be an agent of peace, a tool, an instrument of peace. May bodhisattvas guide my hands in trying to heal humanity and the world and nature and all of that. So how much worse would it be without that? And as I've heard one Lama say, every time we do some kind of practice like that, or a puja practice, meaning making offerings to the Buddhas, or make prayers and we send out them, the hearts of all beings become just a tiny bit kinder. It's a lovely way of thinking. Because of our shared interdependence, every time we do some meaningful spiritual practice for everyone in the world, everyone becomes just a tiny bit kinder. Tiny bit, yes, but still so meaningful, because incrementally that contributes to something good. So not to underestimate that as well, because of course, if we can imagine, if we had 3,000 people come together and for 10 days only recite hate slogans, and that does happen on occasion. Well, that would have a very negative effect on the health of our society, of our community, of us as species. Certainly people do that. That's not good. Let's not do that. Let's do the opposite. So that's the power of prayer. And then Atisha and Chekhova tell us what to do at the time of death. The same 5 principles, but used in a slightly different manner. So how does it work? At the time of death, the quintessence teaching for the Mahayana transference of mind is the 5 forces themselves, while giving importance to my path of deportment. So how does it work? This is specifically about the moment of dying. And of course, Buddhism has very elaborate teachings on what exactly happens there. How does the process of death occur? That's very, very helpful to study, because this is one thing that we are all certainly going to encounter. Some of us will die fast, and of us will die slowly. Some of us will die extremely slowly, but all of us will go through the same stages of the elements in the body dissolving, our consciousness levels dissolving one into the other. We will go through similar experiences of seeing different things and so forth, and then we will pass on into the so-called bardos, or intermediate states, and there's a few of them actually. So because there's so many very clearly defined things that are happening there, it's very good to eventually study those teachings. But suffice it to say for now that when we approach death, grosser level of consciousness slowly start deactivating, along with the deactivation of certain aspects of our body. Eventually our brain will shut down, and that's when we are clinically dead from the scientific point of view. From a Buddhist point of view, we're not yet dead. Our consciousness is still in the body, but the breath is no longer moving, so our gross consciousness is dead. Because the brain is dead, the gross consciousness is dead. And yet our subtle and innermost subtle minds are still there. And that's where some practitioners are able to stay in the body in the post-mortem meditation, known as Tugdam, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for days. So the scientists have definitively established that that's a thing because the body does not decompose. It retains a certain level of warmth. So it's completely wrong from a scientific point of view. They can't explain it. So they perceive it as a strange, miraculous occurrence that has no scientific explanation about it. But the fact that scientists have witnessed that and observed it and documented that is undeniable. Many times that happened. It's a very large point of discussion between the Dalai Lama and scientists in the Mind and Life conferences. Or like, what's up with those post-mortem meditations that we're witnessing? The scientists ask. And he provides an explanation. They're like, oh, okay, interesting. Let's see if we can research that a bit more. And there's lots of research actually being done on that. It's very confusing still in that, well, the only explanation that explains what happens there has to come from the meditator's point of view, because only a meditator can explain what subjectively unfolds there for a person who's in that state. But all of that is to say, so we are going to die and enter this subtle state, and then eventually we're going to leave our body. So then the body will start decomposing and will be discarded or dealt in other ways. But in that process of us passing away, before our gross consciousness has deactivated fully, along with the death of our brain, there is a very, very important period there in which the state of our mind will affect everything that happens for us later. So the state of our mind in those moments or in those hours of our consciousness gradually dissolving into a more subtle state, what happens there will fully affect our next rebirth and the types of visions we will have between the current rebirth and the next one, and many other things. And that's absolutely a fact that is also absolutely quintessentially important in the Hindu tradition as well, which is why in the Hindu tradition there are lots of stories to the effect of this great sinner was dying. I remember that one story. There was a very bad guy who did lots of negative stuff throughout his life, but he had a son, and he named his son Vishnu. And although he was generally a real jerk, he loved his son. So as he was passing away, you know, whom can I turn to? I have the son that I love. So he was calling out Vishnu, Vishnu, meaning his son. But because Vishnu is still the name of Vishnu, the god, when the guy finally died, he was probably dying in a relatively anguished state because the way you live affects the way you die. When he died, some beings, and those would be kind of projections of his own consciousness, but still, some beings came to drag him into hell. But then messengers of Vishnu came and said, no can do, sorry. He said the name of the Lord. So his mind was turned towards the name of the Lord in his last moments. So from that point of view, you have no reason to take him to hell. He's actually going to a nice place with us. So sorry. So even that passing thought of something virtuous was enough to trigger some positive karmas from his karmic repository, establishing a good rebirth for him. So that was more of a lucky accident, even though, of course, another thing to do if we are definitively dying in the next few seconds is to virtuously think of the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, or just the Buddha, or Tara, or another high realized being that we have a connection to. So whichever being we have the most karmic affinity with, like realized being, someone like Tara, or Padmasambhava, or Medicine Buddha, or Buddha himself, or the historical Buddha, turning our mind there is the number one solution, or number one decision when we know that truck is going to hit us in the next 3 seconds. But when we have a bit more time, we are invited to apply these 5 forces, which prepares us for death very nicely. So it starts with the intention to not be separated from bodhicitta while dying and after death in our future lives as well. So thinking, I am about to go through this very large transition. My intention is to keep my mind on bodhicitta until my gross consciousness has fully dissolved, to recall bodhicitta in the bardo, in the intermediate state, and to never forget about bodhicitta in any of my future lives. That's the intention. For habituation, we, of course, once again, try to remind ourselves of bodhicitta in any way possible. So that's why people ideally die in an environment that has some reminders related to their spiritual practice. And in the Japanese tradition, that was brought to ultimate perfection, where they had room dividers, so room dividers with paper, on which there would be a full drawing of the Pure Land that you can go to, one of the Pure Lands that your consciousness can travel to if you create the causes. So as the person was dying, that room divider would be put in front of their bed, at the foot of their bed. So they would be constantly looking at this image of the Pure Land of the Buddha of Infinite Light. And so their mind would be constantly, every second that their eyes are open, getting habituated to that. But it's not uniquely a uniquely Buddhist approach, because you have in the Christian tradition, first of all, of course, different images reminding you of the sacred nature, Jesus, Mary, and so forth. And you would also have a priest with you on some occasions, the priest reminding you, reciting prayers to absolve you of sins, reciting prayers for your passing, and so forth. And there's a very elaborate dance there, in that, like, lots of rituals are done for a person before their mind fully dissolves, so as to program the mind to think of virtue, be focused on virtue, and of course, if done skillfully, that can be very helpful. If done unskillfully, that can be terrifying, because if you have basically a bad, unqualified priest, he would be telling you about how you're going to hell. You're just like, how is that helpful? But that's just insanity. It's just the least. It is the most uncompassionate thing to do, and the most compassionate thing to do. It's sometimes said, the most helpful thing we can do for a being is to help it die in a way where their mind is focused on virtue. So that goes for both humans and animals, actually. So for animals, the virtue that we can provide to them is, first, we can plant positive seeds in their mind by reciting mantras to them, and throughout their lives. You better buy those audiobooks, get an Audible subscription, buy all the Buddhist books, good Buddhist books, there are bad ones as well, but get all the good Buddhist books and make your dog listen to all of them 35 times. It is so important, it cannot be overestimated. There's a very important story about Vasubandhu. Vasubandhu was one of these two great Buddhist psychologists, along with his brother Asanga. They had a bit of brotherly rivalry going on. So Vasubandhu had the habit of reciting some very important texts every morning, and he had a pigeon living above his cave. So the pigeon picked up that audible transmission from Vasubandhu. So Vasubandhu didn't have a Bluetooth speaker. Instead, he had his own mouth. So he had to recite all those texts. We are in the day and age where we don't even need to open our mouth. We just need to literally press that button. Technology is incredible these days. You can have a Bluetooth speaker with a micro SD card in it, reading out those Dharma books to your dogs all day long. You're at work, doing your thingy thing, and then you come back and your dog has listened to this Dharma book 40 times while you were away. So that what happened to that pigeon was that pigeon later got reborn with knowledge of that specific text that Vasubandhu was reciting, to such a degree that he immediately became the most educated master in that specific field of knowledge. However, because Vasubandhu was only reciting that one text, the guy who became the great scholar of that specific field had to still struggle to study all the other fields of knowledge, because Vasubandhu did not bother to recite those other ones. What does that teach us? Choose a variety of different audiobooks for your dog, for your cat, for your snail. Anyone can benefit from that, and of course for ourselves as well. And so that's the one thing that we can do, planting those seeds. And another very important thing is to make the animal, as it's passing away, feel loved, protected. It's close to you, it's safe. So whoever the dog feels the safest with in the family needs to be hugging it and and things like that. That's very important. So the mind is in a virtuous, safe state. It feels safe, and because of that, positive karmic seeds can be activated. For humans as well, similarly, to activate this force of habituation, we would ideally agree with our loved ones or the hospital or wherever it is that they would be some reminders of our practice around us, even if we are in the hospital bed, putting the picture of our teachers, one picture, anything, the image of anything at all that we can sneak into that situation of dying that would remind us of our spiritual practice. And similarly, of course, if our relatives are dying, they're Catholic, we're not trying to flash them with the images of the Buddha. The most divine, beautiful, soothing picture of Mary, if they have faith in Mary or something like that, would be what activates the virtue in the mind. I'm essentializing it very, very briefly, and actually this is a theme that really deserves to be studied on its own. There are wonderful books on this. I will link them in the resource page. That's one of the most important aspects of Buddhist knowledge, how to die well, how to help others die well. But I'm like bringing it down to what's said here. So habituation here means reminders, but also, yes, if we know that, we have a few days or a few months before we'll die, doing every single thing we can to habituate our mind to bodhicitta, because bodhicitta includes the entirety of the Dharma. So yes, we can still listen to those audiobooks ourselves. Actually, if we're in a coma, it's good to instruct our relatives to put those AirPods into our ears so we listen to Dharma books all day long. Still, our subtle consciousness might be hearing them, even though our gross consciousness is temporarily in a coma state. So whatever it is, any Dharma imprint that we can put in there or that our loved ones can put in for us, super helpful. That's the force of habituation. But I think I skipped white seed here. So white seed here, when we are dying, means that we try to get rid of our possessions. We try to convert the material energy that we have in terms of our stuff that will then, when we die, be thrown out anyway. No one wants to, oh, these precious garden dwarfs that I've been accumulating all my life, these 40 teapots and these pictures from, when I was in college. Yeah, some of it might have cultural value if we think that's the case. Good to donate it to cultural institutions or whoever might be interested. Everything else, best to transform into money, have that money be donated to meaningful charities, meaningful Dharma projects, and so forth. It doesn't just have to be Dharma projects, but actually, if we're thinking about, our money resources, yes, thinking what can go to our relatives, children, and so forth, thinking what can go to charitable projects, helping people looking for that cure from cancer and so forth. And ideally donating something to Dharma activities as well, because these are just different types of merit. They will all help us. So in Tibet, quite often, whatever was left after a person passed away, nomads didn't have much. It wasn't that much when a nomad died, but still, whatever little bits of wealth that they might have would be converted to money, and then that would be converted to food for Dharma practitioners who were performing different types of retreats. So just on behalf of that dead person, there would be some tea and porridge offered to people who are practicing the Dharma. It's not much, but it's very meaningful because it creates that special connection to the Dharma in particular, while supporting all the other types of charitable activities, humanitarian activities, also, of course, so meaningful to do. So absolutely wonderful. If we make very clear instructions for our loved ones, it's very good to have a clear will, and so that everyone knows where to look for that. Of course, because we all know the drama of, like, there are 50 iterations of their will, and we don't know which one is correct, or like, oh, it got lost at the last moment. No, who knows? Oh, somehow, that drama. To avoid that, Buddhists are invited to have very clear instructions that everyone is familiar with, at least your attorney and so forth. It just also eases the mind. Another thing there is, of course, eliminating all at once. But here, eliminating all at once does not so much mean focusing on our self-cherishing. Yes, eliminating all at once still means attenuating all of our afflictions. So when we're in the process of preparing for death, if we're catching ourselves getting irritated, best to drop that. If we're catching ourselves getting super desirous, that one last trip to, I don't know, whatever it is, like if we catch ourselves, our mind basically moving in anywhere away from balanced clarity towards anger or pride or jealousy, if we catch ourselves getting lost in some hateful thoughts, of course we need to bring ourselves to the center, because it's dangerous to be hateful throughout when we're alive. But as we're nearing death, the chances of that hatred affecting us in negative ways are much higher. So stepping back from that, literally feeling, oops, no, not going down that way, not the time. It's never the time, but still, especially not now. But another aspect that added here is that eliminating all at once here refers to our grasping towards the body. In the most dramatic thing, what might happen if we're super attached to our body is that we will be reborn as a worm inside that body that just hangs out in there. And there's the one story about how a lady who was particularly attached to her looks got reborn as a snake that was hugging that very skeleton after its own death. So we think like, oh, these dramatic stories, what is that? Well, just what your mind gets really obsessed with, it gravitates towards. They're much more funny things that we can reborn as if we allow our obsession over something to be the main thought that's present in our mind as we're passing away. So to counteract that skillfully, we have quite a lot of practices on releasing the grasping towards the body. So more elaborate ones include the so-called practice of Cho or Lujin, which is the generosity of the body, in which in a very elaborate guided meditation, we would be mentally transforming our body into a meaningful offering for all the sentient beings. We would transform it into nectar that's offered to the Buddhas, but we would also transform it into meat that's fed to the hungry spirits, and we would also transform it into different things that other types of spirits might require. So we're basically practicing transforming this material energy into meaningful offering for everyone. There are actually more elaborate and more abbreviated versions of that. I'm mostly familiar with the more abbreviated ones. But there are other meditations from the tradition of Lojong in which we, for example, meditate on releasing the 5 elements of our body into the universe, so that every aspect of earth in our body, blessed with our bodhicitta, becomes the blessed earth that helps all beings be nourished and prosperous and so forth. And the air that's circulating through our body, may it enter the entirety of air, but still be blessed with bodhicitta and benefit of others. And the same with water, the same with heat, the same with space. So releasing them all, it's a very specific meditation, but very helpful for that as well. And there are other things of just thinking, well, this body will be reabsorbed by the earth. Thank you very much, Mother Earth. You take back the 5 elements that you lent me. In my next rebirth, you're going to offer me other types of 5 elements, another body. So I don't need to grasp at this one. So with gratitude, re-offering the 5 elements back to where they came from, or to the 5 elements themselves. They're going to take care of it. So whatever helps us, there are many techniques of that nature. They're just skillful mind training tricks. But whatever helps us release grasping at this body, even thinking, oh, in the Pure Land, if we're going to a Pure Land, there are specific practices for that. We won't end up there accidentally. We need to practice those. But if we're thinking in a Pure Land, I will get a much better body, much more suitable for Dharma practice than this one. So that can be another thing. And there's a whole story about that, about a practitioner who was not passing away even though it was his time, because he was so attached to butter tea, which is a big thing for Tibetans. So he's just hanging on, and not moving on and drinking that butter tea, and obviously super unwell and not helpful to anyone else to have a person who's clinging to dear life. That actually happens a lot in the West as well, where people, instead of moving on peacefully, they really cling on, but then it becomes super taxing for themselves, and everyone is super unhappy seeing them being in that miserable state of being afraid to pass on. That's actually very discouraging for everyone. So the master of that monastery talked to that practitioner and said, oh, they have much better tea in the Pure Land, and left immediately. That was enough. He just wanted that butter. He just wanted to have that butter tea. That was enough of a thing. So from that point of view also, if we are focused on Pure Land rebirth, and I'm just going to very briefly list the causes for that as well right now, that will be very helpful. So that's eliminating grasping at the body. That's the one here. And then prayer is praying. May I always be reborn where I will be able to fulfill my bodhicitta aspirations. Sometimes there are more dramatic prayers. Great practitioners can pray to be reborn in hell realms to benefit beings. But there are stories about how when praying for that, you actually have very low chance of getting there. One great master in particular was praying for that his entire life. And then as his imminent passing away was approaching, he was visibly upset. So he's dying and he's visibly upset, and his students are like, uh-oh, like we studied with this guy, and now he's very upset as he's passing away. Doesn't mean his practice wasn't good, that he's going to end up in bad rebirth. Sometimes when your karma is very strong, you can get visions of your next rebirth very clearly. So if you're going, that's why some people, as they're passing away, scream from incredible fear because they have hellish visions unfold. And some people, like Steve Jobs, he died full of bliss. They see divine visions unfold because their positive karmic seed has been activated, and they're already on that track towards moving in a very positive direction. So this teacher was super upset, and the students were like, "Okay, well, that's not encouraging." So they asked, like, "What's happening?" And he said, "I'm kind of sad because I spent my whole life praying to be reborn after I die in hell so that I can benefit sentient beings there. But I'm now seeing that that's not going to happen." So it was sad that he was not going to hell because he was receiving visions of Pure Lands, because he was going into a Pure Land. But many of us are not at that level of practice where we can sincerely pray to be born in hell to benefit beings there. We might get to that level of courage eventually. And actually, if we realize the emptiness of all things, we will know that hells are just projected realms. They're not real. But so is this, in a way. You know, this is also like a dream. So basically, for those who have ultimate bodhicitta, there are no actual hells, but there's no actual human realm either. It's all a dream, in a way. It's just some beings are locked into a very nightmarish dream. And we can benefit them, for sure. There are practices for that, especially if we are a realized practitioner. So then the prayer becomes very meaningful, but also quite lighthearted, because, you know, you're not going to an actual hell where you will be locked and suffering and, you know, all that. But for us right now, we are locked and suffering and, right here. So the best we can pray for, may I always be born where I will have access to bodhicitta, where my bodhicitta can grow deeper. May I never be separated from it. May I never be born in a situation where there's no teachings on, but, you know, all of those sorts of prayers. So basically praying for bodhicitta in all sorts of ways we can imagine, and reciting the existing prayers that have been blessed by many masters along those lines. And that way, if we're passing like that, we are passing away in a very meaningful way. We're guaranteed a good rebirth. But then it says here, while giving importance to my path of deportment. So what it refers to here is the actual way to die. So like those final moments, what to do there. So the ideal situation for those who are practicing these instructions would be to adopt the sleeping lion position, in which we lie down on our right side. That's the way the Buddha passed away. So you can see it in some of his statues. So on our right side, which is also the position to use for lucid dreaming and dream yoga. Lucid dreaming and dream yoga prepare us for dying and for bardo, actually. So adopting that position, we're on our right side. Our left arm is along our torso, just in that direction, on our thigh, one leg above the other. And we can even block our right nostril. And as we're lying in that position, our right palm is underneath our right cheek, we would be practicing Tonglen. So we will be giving out all the happiness and joy we can. And as we're passing away, we can take on the sufferings of all beings, you know, dissolve them into the suffering that we're experiencing as we're passing away. And as we're doing that, of course, the power of prayer is to pray, may I become a Buddha as soon as possible. Ideally now, but if not, as soon as it can happen. And that will be the best way to die according to these instructions. In a way, it surpasses the technical types of pova, which means consciousness transference. That's what it says here, transference of mind. Tibetan Buddhism has many practices for the technical transference of mind, which means practices for forcibly sending out our consciousness into a pure land or into a state of realization. There are many practices of different levels for that. Some just mean resting in the ultimate nature of reality. If we know how to do that, that's a pretty tall order. But doing that, and that transfers us into the ultimate nature of reality. Some practices include visualizations in which we would have a Buddha above our crown, we would use specific techniques, and literally eject our consciousness, and then the body dies because the consciousness has been separated from it. The consciousness goes into a pure land. Some practitioners did it when Chinese communists in 1959 and during the Cultural Revolution were planning to shoot them. So quite literally, there are many stories about practitioners who said, okay, I know you're about to shoot me. Thank you very much. But before that, can I just have 5 minutes to do my prayers, please? And whoever would be in charge of executions would sometimes be like, okay, yeah, whatever. It's not going to help you, but sure. It's like, I'm going to have a cigarette while you're doing that. And then in those 5 minutes, they would prefer transference and die. So their mind would go to Pure Land. But why they did that was not because they were afraid like of a bullet hitting the body and the pain. They did not want the person to create the negative karma of killing them. So they just kind of send their consciousness to Pure Land personally. And that's certainly a degree of practice that's available. It is forbidden to use that for suicide. It's like, it is strictly forbidden. It is negative karma to do that prematurely. They only did that because it was obvious it's their last moments. You know, that person in charge of execution is not going to let them go. And they didn't want the executioner to create that super negative karma. So they just did it themselves by sending the consciousness into Pure Land. But for us, we can learn those techniques from qualified tantric masters. They're not that difficult. It's a very sequential training where you receive very clear instructions on each step. You perform them together with a teacher. You train that. And in many systems of training, you actually have a little aperture that appears on your crown. And that can be tested by injecting a stalk of grass there, and it will be held. So you can sometimes see pictures from these POVA trainings, which are offered usually to large groups of beings, large groups of people, in which everyone has that stalk of grass sticking from their crown in that little aperture that appears as a result of the training, therefore opening the gate for the consciousness to be ejected when necessary, sometimes many decades later. So that's fairly impressive because, like, wow, an actual aperture can appear in your skull. That's very impressive, which it is. It's a demonstration of the force of our mind and how it's so much more than the force of matter. But that's not the only POVA that's available. And in a way, that POVA is just a bunch of mantras, movements, visualizations, and so forth. But some people learn that while not having bodhicitta, while not having genuine loving kindness and compassion and so forth. So in a way, because bodhicitta is the actual source of all of this and the meaning of all of this, here, this teaching of 5 forces is presented as the superior type of POVA. We can still use that injecting consciousness business, and it will be super powerful when combined with these forces. But without these 5 forces, that's just a bunch of movements and breathing techniques and mantras. Might still be super beneficial, but might not also if it is devoid of this super powerful thing that's presented here. And here, the authors do not teach us techniques for going into a Pure Land specifically, but I'll just list them anyway. The tradition from which this teaching came, in all of Lojong teachings in a way, or most of them, the old Kadam tradition founded by Atisha, had a very strong connection to the same Pure Land that's popular in Chinese Buddhism and Korean, Japanese, and Vietnamese Buddhisms. And that's the Pure Land of the Buddha of Infinite Light, the Pure Land of Great Bliss, or Sukhavati. So that's the main one that we can, most of us can aim for. If we're reborn there, and there are techniques for that, we will have perfect conditions for spiritual practice. And also, while practicing those techniques associated with the Pure Land, we can transform our mind already. It's also possible to practice in order to go to Pure Land, but get awakened right here. Sometimes that happens too. So how does that work? We need to work on 4 conditions. I'm not going to go into them in detail, but just to plant that tiny seed and then hopefully one day explore. We would also be doing 4 things. We would be habituating our mind to this idea of the Pure Land of Great Bliss. There are descriptions of it. What does it look like? Who's the boss there? Buddha of Infinite Light. You know, what does it all look like? What's going to happen when you're reborn there? What kind of body, energetic body you're going to obtain? Yada, yada, yada. So habituation. The second one is prayer. May I be reborn in the land of great bliss for the benefit of all beings, please. Thank you very much. So prayers of aspiration once again. Having bodhicitta, that's the 3rd cause for getting there. And the 4th cause is generating merit. So it kind of very nicely overlaps with this list. So we need bodhicitta and merit. And we, on top of that, just need to gradually explore this idea of that Pure Land that we might go to, and to offer prayers to go there specifically. So directing our karmic energy there, that will be super helpful because it is the easiest thing to do in terms of dying, whereas that post-mortem meditation, where your mind is focused on emptiness, but you have already died, but your body is not fully, blah, blah, blah. That's extremely advanced, very hard to do. You need to be a yogi of highest caliber. To go to a Pure Land, you just need to have these 4 conditions and be somewhat of a sincere practitioner. And that's not difficult to do. So more and more teachers in this day and age offer large teachings on these causes of being reborn in the great land of great bliss. There's lots of incredible stories, of course, about this practice from the last 2,500 years of Buddhism. It is a very large practice in the Chinese-speaking community. It is the main form of Buddhism in the United States, meaning the biggest Buddhist organization in the United States. The Buddhist Churches of America is a Pure Land organization. Very important in Japan, very important in Korea and Vietnam, and very helpful in terms of how everything from this text could be also integrated into that practice. But I just wanted to mention that in case we're like, okay, what's the best strategy for preparing for death? Many of my teachers have said, explore the teachings in Pure Lands, because in a way they integrate everything that's said here about the 5 forces, but they're also easy to apply. And over time, they can be studied for sure. There are lots of wonderful sources. I'll include some in the list. But for now, trying to apply 5 forces where we're alive is the job at hand. So that means intention. May always have bodhicitta, white seed, creating merit, habituating ourselves to bodhicitta again and again, then eliminating all at once, catching our self-cherishing and waving a finger at it, and praying to deepen these qualities. That's the thing. And that concludes point 5. So once again, point 5 is telling us what to do throughout this life and in the moment of death. So Atisha is saying, even if you do lose this precious piece of paper with all of its instructions, just memorize those 5 words and try to do them a little bit every day. Through that, your bodhicitta will grow. That's your practice for this entire lifetime. So if we can do that, we're living in accordance to his beautiful instructions. So let's play with that if we want. And next time we will conclude the remaining 3 points. And then we'll have a full lifetime of practicing with these methods if we want to. So just taking a moment to dedicate the energy of our practice, listening, discussing, whatever it was that was inspiring for us or meaningful or caused our interest, may that grow. And may all the positive energy of loving kindness and wisdom in the depth of our mind fully be revealed for the benefit of all who live. And may all beings awaken to their true, pristine, beautiful nature. May all beings be happy and peaceful and healthy, and may they all live at ease. Thank you very much, and wishing everyone a beautiful weekend. See you next time.